You were the kid who helped, the one who carried Band-Aids in your pocket for the playground, the one who rubbed your siblings' back when they had a fever, the one the adults called mature for your age, because you always seemed to know when something was wrong, and without waiting, you stepped in. Nobody had to ask you to. You became quiet when your mother was tired. You sat beside the classmate who was crying without demanding words. You didn't want much in return, just the reassurance that people were okay. They called it empathy. They called it a gift. They'd say things like, "You'd make a great nurse one day." And a part of you believed them, because you had seen it in stories, in dramas where a patient flatlined, and the nurse raced in, pushing a crash cart like they were carrying the weight of the world. You watched how patients looked at them, not as staff, not even as strangers, but as hope itself. And you thought, I could be that. Not a doctor, too cold, not a therapist, too abstract, but a nurse, a doer, a responder, someone who walks toward pain instead of away from it. What began as something beautiful, noble, purposeful, rooted in kindness, quietly became your identity. And what no one told you was this. Once the world sees you as the helper, they stop asking if you are okay. You get good at being needed, so good that you almost forget how to be anything else. In school, you were the anchor of every group project, the one people leaned on. Not brilliant in a dazzling way, but steady, reliable, consistent. The one who stayed up until 3 a.m. finishing the hardest parts because no one else would. When the time came to choose a career, nursing didn't feel like a decision. It felt like destiny, the next chapter in a story you had already begun writing since childhood. Your first semester clicked. You didn't flinch at the unglamorous parts, wiping someone down, cleaning up what others might call dirty work. It never felt beneath you. It felt real. You liked giving comfort. You liked being useful. You liked how patients looked at you when you explained things gently, in words they could understand. You didn't know then how heavy that gift would become, that being good at it meant always being asked for more. Still, back then, you were hopeful. You were the one who brought coffee for your classmates before clinical rotations, the one who volunteered for the harder shifts during training, the one who stayed late, comforting a family who seemed lost after visiting hours ended. Everyone said you were meant for this. And maybe that was the hardest part. You weren't forced into nursing. You chose it, because you were the helper child, because they knew you would never stop. And here is where the story deepens, because you weren't just stepping into a profession, you were stepping into a tradition. For centuries, society has built legends around nurses, branding them as angels of mercy. Florence Nightingale walking through Crimean battlefields with a lantern, Clara Barton pulling the wounded from Civil War trenches. Their images were painted as pure, selfless, saintly. Society loved the idea of the tireless caregiver, but rarely paused to ask who was carrying them. That's the cultural paradox you inherited. The world praises helpers, but forgets their humanity. It was as true for Nightingale, who herself collapsed from exhaustion, as it was for nameless women who nursed soldiers, factory workers, or plague victims without rest. You were stepping into that long, complicated lineage without realizing it. You thought the white coat and stethoscope would be a shield. Instead, they were chains disguised as honor. Still, you didn't see that yet. You came in ready, full of purpose. You studied the signs, memorized the ranges, practiced your IVs, passed your boards. You were one of the good ones, the ones who truly cared. And that was your armor, at least until you walked into your first real shift. Because nothing, not the textbooks, not the simulations, not the kind words of mentors, could prepare you for the moment when the beeping wasn't a drill, the family's tears weren't staged, and a patient's pulse truly slipped away beneath your trembling fingers. That moment was coming. You didn't know it yet. All you knew was that you were ready to give yourself to the work, and you believed it would be enough. Your first real shift came like a storm you thought you were prepared for, but weren't. No simulation, no instructor's safety net, no carefully staged chaos. Just a full assignment of patients, a glitching vitals monitor, and a charge nurse too busy to explain where the crash cart even was. Barely through orientation, you heard the words, "Code Blue." The adrenaline roared through you. Your heart pounded so loud it drowned out the alarms. You froze, rooted to the spot, until someone shoved you aside, not in cruelty, but urgency. Later, they told you it was normal. Everyone freezes their first time. But that night, you didn't sleep. You couldn't eat. You replayed it again and again, the shouts, the alarms, the look on the family's face as they realized what was happening. And you understood in your bones, this wasn't TV. This wasn't clean. This was loss, wrapped in sterile gloves and hospital policy. Still, you kept showing up, because you believed you could grow into it. And in some ways, you did. You learned how to chart while walking, how to push meds while answering 3 questions at once, how to comfort a family while your own mind ticked through a checklist. You became faster, sharper, more efficient. But efficiency came with a price. You were trained to advocate for patients. But when you spoke up, they told you to stay in your lane. Yeah, you were taught to trust your gut, but your gut didn't matter if it clashed with a doctor's ego. You were told to take breaks, to protect your peace. But when you did, you returned to side eyes, and your patients floated to someone else without your consent. The truth you hadn't been warned about revealed itself. The system didn't care. Not really. And this wasn't new. Hospitals, for all their life-saving glory, have long been machines. After World War II, medicine was industrialized. Wards became production lines. Patients turned into cases. Nurses into interchangeable parts of a bureaucratic machine. Charts had to be completed for liability, not humanity. Administrators worried about numbers, not faces. And in this world, the nurse became the buffer, between doctors who rounded briefly and patients who cried endlessly, between what should happen and what actually got done. You carried 6, sometimes 7 patients at once, knowing deep down you couldn't give each the attention they deserved. You tried to prioritize, tried to stay calm, but it gnawed at you. You hadn't gone to the school to feel like a cog. Yet here you were, passing meds like clockwork, cleaning up the same messes, covering for the CNA who called out, catching the new nurse before she drowned, taking vitals with one hand while catching a blood pressure collapse with the other. And still, management told you to smile more, to be less direct, to be a team player when you pointed out that half the machines on the floor didn't even work. You started to wonder if the person you trained so hard to become was even allowed to exist here. Were you a nurse or just a patch between policy and pain? Between a healthcare system built on profit margins and the very real people suffering inside it? The cruelest part was this: you still cared. You still wanted to help. And that made it hurt even more, because every shift demanded that you carry more than was humanly possible. The patients saw your kindness. The system saw only your capacity. And so the burden grew. Night after night, you clocked out but never really left. Your badge was off, your scrubs in the laundry, but your body carried the weight of it all. The unrelenting alarms, the missed call light, the patient who coded, the family who didn't get to say goodbye. The system told you to move on. Your body said otherwise. Your muscles remembered. Your chest remembered. You couldn't trick yourself into believing you had left it behind. That's how the identity of the helper grew sharper teeth. It was no longer just about being kind. It was about being consumed. What once felt like purpose now sometimes felt like punishment. You had chosen this path freely, but the cost was becoming something you never could have imagined, and yet, still, you stayed. Because you believed. because you hoped the next shift would be different, because somehow you still thought it mattered. Your shift never truly ended, not when it lived in your muscles, stitched into your memory, weighing on you long after the badge was off. You drove home replaying the night, the missed lab, the unanswered call light, the family who didn't get to say goodbye. You told yourself tomorrow would be different, but your body didn't believe you. Your knees ached before you even walked through the door. Your face carried the marks of an N95 mask. Your neck carried the tension of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. You hadn't eaten since breakfast. You had needed to pee for 4 hours. Your hands trembled during meds because you were dehydrated, but you pushed through anyway. Because who else would? The world didn't see that. To them, nursing was clean scrubs and stethoscopes. They didn't see you wiping away tears in a storage closet, scarfing down a granola bar while charting, or zipping up a body bag only to step out of the room like nothing happened. They didn't see the dying man asking, "Am I going to make it?" Or the confused patient screaming at you because they were terrified and you were the only one close enough to catch their fear. They didn't see the mother collapse into your arms as you told her it was time to say goodbye. You were expected to be everything at once, strong but not cold, compassionate but not fragile, efficient but never robotic. You weren't allowed to lose it, not in front of them. So you held it in as they coded, as you prayed the meds would work in time, as you cleaned the body and moved on to the next patient as though it were just another task on the list. Only when you sat in your car did you finally break. Sometimes crying, sometimes staring blankly at the steering wheel, heart still racing as if you were in the middle of a rapid response. Then you wiped your face, turned the key, and went home, trying to speak as if it had only been a long shift. And outside the hospital? The losses were quieter, but just as devastating. Birthdays missed, dinners missed, date nights and weekends traded for double shifts. Next time became your mantra, until eventually the invitations stopped coming. You tried to explain, but how could you? How do you describe to someone waiting at home what it feels like to carry another mother's sobs on your shoulder at midnight? How do you describe the exhaustion of giving everything to people who are bleeding, shaking, fading, and then sitting across from someone asking why you didn't text back? They told you to just leave it at work, but you couldn't. Not when your own children's faces reminded you of the little boy who didn't make it last week. Not when the antiseptic smell lingered in your skin. Not when every quiet moment was filled with echoes of alarms. So you built armor. You stopped venting, stopped asking for hugs, stopped expecting anyone outside of nursing to understand. You told yourself you were just tired, but over time you realized something deeper. The job was hardening you piece by piece. You went numb when others cried. You sidestepped vulnerability because you couldn't afford to fall apart. Love, real, patient, tender love, didn't understand that kind of exhaustion. Maybe that's why so many nurses date other nurses. Only they know what it means to be fully present for strangers and utterly absent for the people you love. Only they know what it means to wake up tired in your bones, to roll out of bed already sore, to check your schedule with dread, and still show up because someone is counting on you. And yet, amid all of it, the bureaucracy, the exhaustion, the silence, you found sparks that kept you alive. The old woman who whispered, "Thank you for treating me like I matter." The student nurse who said, "I want to be like you." The patient who looked at you in their most vulnerable moment and said, "You made me feel safe." Those moments became your sustenance, not the paycheck, not the praise of management, not the illusion of prestige. Just the fragile, unspoken truth that you had stepped into another human being's suffering and left them less alone. That was enough to keep you coming back. You thought about quitting. You looked at jobs outside healthcare. But none of them felt real. None of them carried that same sense of raw, burning purpose. Because when everyone else turned away from pain, you walked toward it. Because somewhere inside, you still remembered the child who helped, the student who cared, the nurse who believed. And that belief, however battered, still carried you forward. And that is why it sucks to be one.